actually ask you to join with me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, their elders past, present and future. I'd also like to thank Vivian Skinner. I'm going to leave Vivian to introduce the rest of the panel to you, but Vivian stepped in at very late notice to facilitate tonight's panel because unfortunately Simone went very ill, so wasn't able to do it. But thank you very much to Viv. I'd like to thank her with a small round of applause.
Now, before I introduce our stellar cast, are we working? It's all good? What's that?
Hello.
Cautious. Let me begin with a few news stories, and I'm pretty sure that none of these ones are fake. The Huffington Post reported a couple of weeks ago that a little over half of all Australians aged between 18 and 34 sat down in the cosy warmth of their lounge rooms a couple of weeks ago and watched episode 1 of the final series of Game of Thrones. HuffPost went on to say that the figures for all Australians tuning into that fantasy series was, no matter what their age, 36%. Now here's another bit of news. Last month, Roy Morgan reported that Netflix subscriptions jumped 20% in the first quarter of this year, and right now almost 1/3 of all Australians have a Netflix subscription. Indeed, Roy Morgan tells us that Netflix is spending $8 billion on content alone in this year, more than the entire valuation of its competitor, Foxtel. Final fact, let's turn to Live Performance Australia, which looks at ticket sales and revenues. In its latest figures for 2015, while they sold 18.3 million tickets were sold in Australia that year, 2015. That was actually a fall of 1% in attendances on the previous year, and the annual drop in revenue was close to 7%. Okay, so having laid those all figures and facts out there on the table for you to ponder, I'm going to introduce you now to our panel. First of all, up the end, we have the most wonderful Michael Lynch, who many of you will know of. Perhaps not the most decorative, but I'm pretty sure he's the most decorated man in this room, with both an AM and an AC. He even has a gong.
No.
Oh, come on.
AM and an AO.
Oh, AO. Oh, God. AO. Let me just fill in that C and make it OEs. Wait for it. He even has a gong from our own head of state, Queen Elizabeth II. He made him a Commander of the Order of the British Empire, or CBE for short, in 2008. Have I got that one right? Michael has held many leadership roles in the arts. He's been GM of the Sydney Theatre Company, GM of this place, the Australia Council, head of the Sydney Opera House, and CEO of South Bank Theatre in London. He successfully oversaw the rehabilitation of London's Royal Festival Hall, and in 2011 was appointed CEO of Hong Kong's West Kowloon Cultural District. None of those were easy tasks. Thankfully, we now have him back in Australia, where it's fair to say that despite his best efforts, he has not been idle. Most of you will recall that Michael was one of the loudest critics of the current federal government's $100 million budget cuts to the Australia Council a year or so ago. He was particularly critical of the major performing arts companies, who it seems sat pretty silently while the slash and burn process to OzCo and smaller companies was underway. Michael now chairs Circa in Brisbane and the Sydney Community Foundation, and otherwise, he tells me, he does as little as possible. Next to Michael is Moira Hay, who has been a wise and thoughtful contributor to the national art scene for rather a long time. Moira is one of those enormously valuable arts executives with highly functioning left and right sides to her brain. She's headed up the events and visitor experience at what was once the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, but what is now known most rather ingloriously as Property New South Wales. She's been GM of the Australian Theatre for Young People, executive producer of Sydney Festival First Night, head of production at NIDA, and production manager at the Bell Shakespeare Company, and that's just the start of it. Moira has won a Helpman Award and 3 Drover Awards, and has been a director and chair of many boards and committees. In fact, I got to know Moira when she chaired Legs on the Wall. At the moment, she's a member of the academic board of NIDA. Sitting right next to me here is Lisa Bacon. Now, Lisa is a very important person at the ABC. She's actually a member of the executive team, and she's the director of audiences. She's a giant role steering the ABC through an evolving media landscape as content becomes increasingly platform agnostic. Lisa has straddled both the arts and the corporate worlds. Prior to the ABC, she was Director of Marketing at the Queensland Performing Arts Centre, or we better know it better as QPAC. She's held a major role in innovation at Coca-Cola and has worked as Marketing Director at Village Roadshow and for several pharmaceutical companies. Okay, that's our history's done and out of the way, so let's turn to tonight's topic. Do the arts need rebranding? And I'm turning first to you, Michael, lucky you. With Australians having easy access to more high and low quality culture than ever before, how does your conventional theatre or dance company hope to build audiences and revenues? Will a simple bit of rebranding do the trick?
Well, I don't think it will. I'd be intrigued to throw back to the audience why we're talking about rebranding the arts. It seems to have sort of hit the zeitgeist because of the competitive environment that the arts are operating in, particularly relative to television and online competition. But to me, the arts is something that is amorphous and diffuse, and the idea of trying to change it or to rebrand it. I remember when I was at the Sydney Opera House, and the board, in their wisdom, decided we should go through a branding exercise to see if we could rebrand the Sydney Opera House. I think it cost $180,000 of hard cash, and essentially the conclusions were that the Sydney Opera House really didn't need to do anything. I take the view that the arts themselves are something that sensible countries, sensible politicians, sensible leaders champion as an indicator of what makes society work, what makes it hang together, what makes it great, what makes it distinctive. So in my view, I haven't seen Game of Thrones one episode, but that doesn't mean that I'm not conscious of the competitive environment. I have seen every episode of House of Cards, and that's been much more instructive to me than probably...
Clearly, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones.
On that front. So I just think the idea, I'd be really interested in, perhaps the tender age of 66, I've lost the plot on why you would want to rebrand the arts. But I guess I'd like to be able to pick up in the conversation, what it is that about the arts that needs rebranding.
By the way, we are going to throw a little bit later to you guys, so please get your questions and your thought bubbles ready. Moira, can we throw that tricky question to you? To the arts need rebranding? Will a little bit of rebranding help build audience numbers and revenues?
Look, I think generically the arts need rebranding? I'd have to say kind of no, really. But does that mean that every genre is utilising its marketing capacity to the best of its ability? Is it really mining innovation? Does it really understand its customers, and is it pitching its product in the best way that it can? Well, of course, nobody's perfect. No one's, some of that stuff is, as Lisa can attest to, is very hard to do, very time consuming and really costly. It doesn't. So I don't think that necessarily that all of the arts need to be rebranded, but I do think that there is absolutely room for innovation and there is room for change. And I think, the arts can be, some aspects of arts practice can be very innovative and some can be very slow to respond. And really, in a competitive environment, we need to be faster at being able to capitalise on what's happening, what our customers want, how do they want to receive our product, and are there better ways that we can deliver that? So, I think there's always room for improvement. But overall, no, I would say the arts, as a overarching entity, don't need to be rebranded.
Okay, Lisa.
Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a brand marketer at heart. So I have a very passionate view about this. And that is that brand marketing is rarely ever done at a genre level. Brand marketing is done at an organisational level. And do I think that there is an opportunity for a number of arts organisations to really be clear on what their brand is, what they stand for, how they market that, how they bring that to life for audiences? Yes, 100%, but it's not at a category level, it's at an organisational level. And I would encourage anyone who works for an arts organisation to really be thinking about your brand and what you stand for and what makes you unique and different. And I do think, you know, some of the examples that you gave before, like Netflix, is probably one of the best brand marketing examples in the world at the moment. There's no way they have the best catalogue in any market, but they are number one in every market in the world, and that's because they have this fabulous brand. They've built it on a couple of key tentpoles, House of Cards being one of those, and that's what you automatically think when you think about, you know, on-demand entertainment on the weekend, and they own that space, and they've done it brilliantly. They're very good marketers. So I think the challenge for everybody here is, does your organisation have a very strong brand for the audience that you're going after, and a stronger brand than other players in that market? And that is something that you all should be focused on developing. Which says, is branding important? Yes, I'm the first to say I think branding is incredibly important, but it's important for you at an organisational level, not necessarily at a category level.
Looking at branding, I think we can expand it more broadly to look at how we build audiences and how we build revenue and what we can do to do that, whether it be an actual brand or whether we go out and actively seek new audiences for our product. I know that some of the audiences, some of the arts organisations now film and upload their performances, and in fact I think we're filming us tonight here, and include these online viewers in audience numbers. Does it matter if no one actually turns up to the game? Lisa?
Of course it matters. So if I take, I guess if I sort of ladder down on my branding example, that's just one component for success. You've got to make sure you stand for something. The bigger thing is you've got to make sure people are coming along to enjoy that. And how do you do that? You do that through specific programs or specific bits of content. And yes, you have to have audiences coming along to appreciate that. So I don't think there's any success unless that success is shared and enjoyed across multiple people. That being said, I think one of the benefits of a sort of broadening way you can access content by, you know, social media, by, you know, your websites, means that you can reach more people. Now, ultimately in the arts, you want people to come along to the live experience, but if you can have somebody starting to engage in a different medium, I think that's a fantastic way, you know, to start breaking down the barrier. In reading some of your LPA research, it does suggest there's still a barrier to entry for some different types of art, and maybe the easiest way to break down that barrier is to make that very accessible content in a place where people are, and then the first taste that they get of ballet or theatre or, you know, classical music is a really easy way for them to access that. So I do think embracing a broad spectrum of media is a really good way to bring new audiences into the arts, particularly where there is a barrier to entry, whether it be a ticket price or just an understanding of that category.
Maura, we were talking earlier about Boston, which was suffering like other areas in the United States with falling audience numbers. So they kind of took a collective approach to improving the way they reached out to audiences. And one of the tricks with some of the companies was to work closely with people who worked with underprivileged communities in the city and offered really, you know, cheap tickets. And worked out how to attract those people along. I think they could sit anywhere for $20 in some of the shows. Do you think that's just sort of, can you think of other ways, and you think it's a good idea, and can you think of other ways to broaden that audience appeal so that arts companies can broaden out a bit and improve their brand?
It's a real dilemma, isn't it? Because the ticket cost is a dilemma, and it comes up a lot. But I also think there's a point at which you have to value the work that you produce, and that, you know, I mean, I know certainly I've had the experience, I'm sure lots of other people have, you can present something for free and you can still not get an audience. So it's not, ticket price isn't the barrier, it's one, certainly it is one of the things that people talk about, but I mean, I think it's really about value. People will pay if they perceive that they are getting real value. So if people aren't valuing your product, they're not going to, you know, they're not going to buy it for $40, they're not going to buy it for $20, and in fact they won't even show up for free. So you really need to think about what it is, what is that then that you're delivering, and how can you add value to that? What do people want to see? And I guess the higher your ticket price, we talked about this earlier, the higher your ticket price, the less inclined you are to take a risk, obviously. So, and that's a problem too for companies that are really trying to foster the work of arts practitioners. You'd like to think that you can work in a world where there is some opportunity for experimentation, and with that comes, the idea that not everything is always going to be fabulous. So you want to, so your product, there may be some risk involved in your product. So you do need to think about how you're pricing that. But certainly, we were talking about Splendour, and there's there are plenty of things that people will pay good money for, either for the product or they will pay to upgrade their experience to get seats in the middle of the house, or to get some other kind of benefit that they perceive. And that's not just people of my age. I think it's everyone. Young people will pay as well, if they believe that that they're getting value. I mean, Netflix costs. I know it's perceived to be good value, but there's a cost to that. So,
Michael, you presided over the Opera House at an incredibly extraordinary time when it went as an institution that was pretty much there for sort of elite audiences to a much, much broader audience. I don't know whether that was the time when the School Spectacular started to come to the Opera House, but it was...
No, it wasn't school. I guess
but they
we
were
made a very conscious attempt to try and democratise a place that had previously been seen as the province of, the major companies, and, essentially the elite audiences of Sydney at both price point of entry, what we were doing. So we did free things, we did big things, we did things that were outdoors, we did, big events that, were bringing people into it on the basis that, I suppose we could see that if you kept going the way that it was going, they were going to grey and die as an audience, and that, from that point of view, that was, not going to, those centres have had to redefine themselves over wherever they are in all parts of the world. They need to be rooted in a community, and I don't think the Opera House had ever really, in its first 30 years, other than the period around the opening, ever saw themselves as connected to a community. They saw them connected themselves to an audience of, the major players, and clearly we also saw ourselves as playing to a somewhat captive 40% of the audience who came in from overseas and probably only ever visited once, and didn't matter how they wanted to see a performance. They never really were that concerned what it was. They were probably more concerned about coming into the building. I suppose the other thing that we did, which was important in retrospect, is that we tried not to be focusing it on the rest of the world. And one of the things that disturbs me probably at the moment, if you watch the Helpmans either live on Foxtel or delayed on the ABC the other day, we could have been in any country in the world. There was really no sense that we were in Australia, that we sort of had people who created Australian work, because the whole focus was Book of Mormon, Aladdin, Kinky Boots and My Fair Lady. And I thought it was just absurd that, bearing in mind the collective design and creative talent that exists in this country, that there wasn't even an Australian nominated against Cecil Beaton, who's been dead for 100 years, I think, in the theatre design category. And there was no Australian competition in terms of the awards that supposedly are most important to the Australian performing arts industry. And to me, it's not related necessarily to the rebranding issue, but I think it does speak to what we in the arts, or we in the, I don't even care if we broaden it to the entertainment industry, that we need to be telling our stories, we need to be celebrating our people, and we can't continuously just think, well, we can sell a lot more tickets to Book of Mormon than we can sell to Ladies in Black, or any of the locally creative work. it does disturb me that we're at this point where, with the damage we've done to the smaller, newer, more younger, innovative ends of the sector, that they're having great difficulty getting into competition with tired 4-old American and English musicals. And so I think there are some issues here that we need to be thinking about, of championing our own people. It was exacerbated, I think, in regard to the Helpmans, that where we have the best actors in the world working here from this place, but most of the acting awards were won by overseas actors working in musicals. So so there's something weird's happening. I don't know what it is. I might have been
Perhaps
away
the
too long.
Helpmans need to be overhauled.
Perhaps.
Just before we leave you, Michael, with talking about the Sydney Opera House, around about that time in the early 2000s, and probably after you'd gone, there was an enormous effort to actually expand the brand of the Opera House to isolated areas of Australia, regional communities in Australia, through online delivery. I think that was also a really clever way of introducing children who would have had no hope of getting to the Sydney Opera House to what was on offer. And I think that was really impressive. And I'm not sure. I'm sure that sort of stuff would be done in some way right now. But that was a terrific thing that was done at that stage.
Oh, I just think that any of those big centres, the requirement to democratise themselves is incredibly important. And if we hadn't embarked on that journey, which is hopefully continued over the time that a lot of the time I've been away, that place would they won't continue to maintain relevance, or they'll become tourist venues, which in the month after 9/11. At the Opera House, we lost 45% of the audience within 2 weeks because we were totally dependent on people flying in planes to, do their once-a-year venue, and it took nearly a year to rebuild that audience. And part of rebuilding was to say we need to be relevant to not only the tourist audience, we need to be relevant to the people who have built this place and who are part of this city.
Yeah. Lisa, I think it's fair to say that the ABC brand, as well as being one of the most recognisable brands in this country, if not almost the most, has done a remarkable job in recent times of rebranding its offering through any number of platforms now. I can barely keep up with them all. That's really is an incredible achievement, and I know it's threatened the likes of Rupert Murdoch and the like. Is that sort of an incredible challenge just to keep that
look,
going with the...
there's no doubt at the ABC our single biggest challenge going into the future is how we stay relevant to all Australians, and certainly our new MD Michelle Guthrie has come out and said we have to reach as much as possible 100% of Australians. That's how we stay relevant as a public broadcaster. How do you do that? You don't expect people to come to you. You actually have to work out where they are and go to them. So what we have been doing progressively over the last 3 years is making sure that we understand where audiences are and taking the relevant content to them. So whether it's a news offer on Facebook Messenger because we want young people to be able to make informed decisions about elections and the budget, and they're actually getting a lot of their news off Facebook, or whether it's having on the new Google Home device that actually launched last Thursday, if you ask for a news update, you'll get the ABC News. So we increasingly need to be where you're finding out your information, and if you're under 35, that's probably not broadcast TV or radio. So increasingly we have to go to new spaces to make sure that we are reaching and relevant to the Australian population. I did want to touch on something that you'd mentioned about accessing children. So having spent a couple of years at QPAC, and QPAC run Out of the Box. Do any of you know the Out of the Box Festival? If you've never been, highly recommend going. It's the largest children's festival in the Southern Hemisphere, but more importantly, it is a way of introducing people to the arts. It's incredibly accessible. It's predominantly free. Disadvantaged schools get to attend for hugely discounted prices, ticket events, etc. But most of the events are free. And the best thing about it is it lets a whole new generation experience arts and culture for the first time, and gives them memories that will stay with them forever. So increasingly, I think the arts have to be thinking, how do we introduce new generations to the sort of content that we're making, because that's the future. And if you sort of introduce them at young ages, it becomes so much more accessible to them.
And I think that's, I suppose, one of the issues that disturbs me is the barrier to entry issue.
Yeah.
How kids, whether they be 10-year-olds or 20-year-olds or even 30-year-olds in this city, get access to the quality work that many of us have been privileged enough to experience as either at school or in more recent years. I think that's becoming a huge issue. I've got 3 kids in their 30s who were privileged enough to grow up experiencing the lives of their parents and the entertainment or arts interests of their parents. But I look around in the work that I do in Western Sydney with the Community Foundation. Sydney is become, I don't want to sound like Bill Shorten, but the inequality in Sydney and the inequality in arts experience across a city like Sydney is dramatic. Yeah. And until, so we will be confronting a problem down the track. I meet kids out in Warwick Farm and Claymore and other places now who have never had the experience of not only going to the Opera House, but have never been to an arts performance. So they are totally dependent on their television or their machines as their mechanism for their cultural experience. And so they live in a world of any of those TV shows, but they're not rooted at all in what else is going on. Even more recently, I was appalled by talking to the teachers. I did this interim period at the National Arts School, and one of the things that the teachers were saying to me is that, and I see Damien, who from Waters here, and he knows what this is like, that kids now coming into first year visual arts courses have seem to have stopped going to galleries to look at the work because they think they can get the work online much easier, much more accessible. Well, if you want to be an artist but you only want to look at it online, something's not quite working in my sense in terms of how you're going to experience and what sort of art you're going to do. I could become like John Olsen, I suppose, and start throwing stuff around. But I do think that somehow, I don't think the arts have yet either intellectually or practically engaged with the fact that the ball game is changing in so many fundamental ways. And if I want to see Arthur Boyd's work, I don't want to see it necessarily on my phone. I'd much prefer to see it in a place where I can see the real thing. But these are big issues, I think, for galleries, for the commercial parts of the art sector, and importantly in terms of where is that new audience going to be. New audiences will pay money to go and see comedy, and that audience, the demographic, is incredibly younger than the demographic going to theatre or to classical music or even now rock music. I've been to rock music concerts recently where I felt almost young compared to sort of a large number of the players. Because you were being asked to pay $200 or $300 for the experience. And
someone went to Katie Lang, and I think it was $1,600 a ticket to get a really top ticket. It's extraordinary. Moira, turning to you, the majors have done pretty well with corporate and philanthropic donations over the last decade and a half. I think their corporate and philanthropic donations have gone up by about, I think it's 170%. Do you think with a bit of rebranding, the smaller arts organisations could do a little bit better?
I think it's a challenge, isn't it, for from the small to medium sector to access corporate sponsorship, because you have to provide some benefit, and I think that's a difficulty unless you can partner. I think the small to medium sector has more success in partnering or finding innovative ways to provide that benefit back to corporates. So I know certainly we did a lot of work at ATYP. We were able to leverage quite a lot of funding from trusts and foundations by just thinking about what is our product and how are we delivering that. Can we provide an additional benefit? But I guess even that, sometimes I really struggle with that. The idea that the arts is in some way, the idea that art or high art has to do something rather than it is something in itself. So it only provides a value because it is. It makes people, I suppose art is. Well, certainly the Australia Council research showed that most Australians think that art is the way to increase diversity, to make easier those conversations, those complex conversations of togetherness about and the cohesion that art brings to society. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I'm just saying that that's a pretty heady mantle for arts practitioners to have to market themselves. They have to be the kind of all things to all people. And I think that's a shame that that there's aspects of art or arts practice that can't be a benefit just in and of itself. It can't, it doesn't have to stand for something. It can just be, it can just be of value. So yeah, I think there's opportunity there. I just want to talk about something. Just Michael mentioned the Western Sydney thing. I suppose too you have to think about that. How much of that of the art, is going to be interesting to an 18-year-old or a 15-year-old who lives in Warwick Farm. How much diversity do we actually have? The small to medium sector is probably more diverse, but at a major level, at the majors, how much diversity is there? We were just talking about Cleverman and how exciting. I mean, the first series of Cleverman, I found it breathtaking to see, such a powerful story, and so many great actors. It really, it fills you, with pride, thinking, my God, look at all this great storytelling, great Indigenous storytelling, how incredibly exciting, and it's sitting here, in my television. I mean, in my lounge room. That's amazing.
But I don't know if you've ever been to, or the audience have ever been to Poetry Slam at Bankstown, and it's an absolutely amazing event where kids both post school, but now clearly through school. Interesting, the school part of it is now sponsored by the Australian Federal Police, which is scary in some ways. But it is a fantastic event in that it has really captured the imagination. And for kids who would ever think that people would want to do poetry, even slam poetry, if they've never had the experience of some broader arts education, and a lot of these kids haven't. And it's amazing to watch them and to watch kids from non-English backgrounds doing this stuff, and the enthusiasm that happens in those places. And in many ways, I guess the challenge to many of the existing arts organisations is, can you make a play or a piece of dance or a piece of music as exciting as a night at the Poetry Slam at Brian Brown Hall in Bankstown.
Yeah.
But do you think part of that, the excitement of the Poetry Slam is participation, and that's something we haven't
Exactly right.
talked about, is that idea that that engagement with the arts isn't a passive thing. It's the most exciting when it's at, when you're absolutely in it.
Some of the best nights of theatre I've ever been to are at the Cooma Little Theatre in Cooma, where I grew up. It was just so exciting, and you didn't necessarily expect 10 out of 10 quality acting, but there was so much energy and excitement and passion about what they were doing. It was just a joy to be there. Wonderful stuff. I sit on the board of Beyond Empathy, and we've been making a film in Wollongong, in some of the poorest postcodes in Australia, actually, in southern Wollongong. And we've been working with a group of at least a couple of hundred children aged between 5, I suppose, and 15, making a film called Protection, and 300 of us gathered and watched the early scenes from the cuts from that film Sunday a week ago. The parents were there, the aunties, the great aunts, the dads, the kids were running around, and they were beyond excited to see themselves up there on the screen. And I guess, I mean, in a way, they didn't necessarily realise that they were participating in the arts, but of course they are. And I guess that's one way of introducing people at a very young age to the magic of what that sort of experience can do and how it can build opportunities. We've made other films down there, and some of those young people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds you can imagine have now gone on to get to work in the industry in some capacity and working on this film with the young kids. It's a wonderful experience. In fact, the ABC actually screened one of our previous films, Rites of Passage. But you must see this to a certain extent as well. It's great to see the ABC reflecting a much broader audience with its presenters than it ever has before. How good is that?
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on, the irony of this conversation is we're kind of talking about content as opposed to live experience, but as a producer of content, we strive all the time to work out how do we turn that into a live experience. I went to Mount Isa recently for Triple J. We do a thing called One Night Stand, where we do a public concert for everybody to come along to. Again, just to create a live experience out of something that traditionally you would actually listen to on a radio. And there are many, whether it's outside broadcasts for radio, whether it's we did a big kids concert out in Parramatta for the children to actually meet all the ABC Kids characters. Traditionally, broadcasters, you don't just want to be talking one way. You want audiences to engage with your content. You want to bring it to life. You want people to participate and be part of an experience. So I actually think a lot of these different industry experiences are kind of all starting to come together, because ultimately, the future isn't sort of one way of doing stuff. It's sort of that two-way conversation with your audiences, and how do you create as much of that as possible, regardless of what industry you're in.
Look, we kind of struggled with this particular topic because we sort of it seemed to be a fairly loose and open discussion point, and we've covered a little bit of it tonight. But it's probably good to throw it open to you people. So please feel free.
What did you expect?
Yeah.
Have we answered your question?
Have you got any questions for us?
There we are. Questions.
Go ahead.
Good.
You were the first with your hand up.
Hello. Hi, thank you. There's a bit of a distinction, I think, emerging through the discussion between branding the arts and then branding of specific organisations, and I think it's the first question is really interesting for me, and when I think about how the arts can struggle to attract mass market media attention, the response to the cuts the last few years, and then the momentum we had leading up to last year's election. But then also, we also shift the goalposts in terms of the way we name and talk about the arts. So we've got creative industries here in Victoria. We talk about arts or arts and culture, where sometimes when we're wooing certain sponsors, encouraged to not use the word arts because that's a bit intimidating or elitist or something. So what are your thoughts on the way that the arts needs to come across to kind of, both capture those hearts and minds publicly, but also be more influential politically?
I reckon that's an incredibly good question. We kind of grappled with that, marketing the arts as sort of high-end arts versus all the other popular culture, which kind of seems to be doing okay for itself anyway when it comes to, we've talked about Netflix and some big music festivals and whatever. Come on, you three, great minds.
Can I give you a more brand marketing response to that? It's really hard to create a brand for anything if you don't have really clear common values, audience that you're talking to. Like, brands are created because you've got a real sense of what it stands for. So it's very hard until you've got that to actually create a brand from it. And I think one of the challenges I picked up in what you were saying is until you've defined what it is that you want to put into that arts, and that might vary depending on the challenge that's ahead of you, it's very hard to kind of wrap it up as a brand. And I think that is a bit of a challenge for the arts because it means different things to different people. And the whole sort of existence of brands is because you're really clear on what that actually means and what that stands for and that common set of values that actually are delivered through that. So I actually think therein kind of lies your challenge, which doesn't answer your question, but just puts out the challenge as quite a big one until you're like really clear on, you know, what you want your definition and your values and the set of things that need to live within that brand are.
Look, I think that's right, and I guess, you know, if when you're participating in the medium sector, then in the medium arts sector, then you would want to try to get some differentiation between, you know, it seems crazy to me that those companies are called the majors, and that in itself is a little bit, you know, alarming. But I was thinking of it as the arts and cultural sector. I mean, you know, personally, I hate the idea that it's an industry. I always remember Jim Sharman said, "Industry. What sort of industry? If the arts is an industry, then it's a cottage industry." So I always thought that was quite funny. But yeah, I suppose to me, it's much. It's thinking about what some of the things we discussed earlier today is that idea of high art and low art. I suppose is it arts and entertainment, arts and culture. You know, does it matter? Do we have to, you know, do you have to find a definition for yourself that encompasses? It's quite as a sector, it's a very broad sector. So I guess it depends on, to your point, who are you communicating with, and how do you need to leverage, you know, that information?
One of the things the Boston Symphony Orchestra did when it was trying to work out what the heck to do to stop this ageing, greying audience who was sort of slowly popping off, leaving them with empty seats, was to do a really thorough data analysis of what was needed and their existing audience and how to reach out, that really high-grained analysis. I mean, in a sense, I guess that can be really costly, but at the same time, it goes to what you were saying, helping you to understand your audience and get your messages right, get your target, work out where to spend that money in attracting new audiences. I mean, perhaps that's one way that you can rebrand yourself, by actually understanding your product a hell of a lot better. There's a second person here before we go over to you. Yeah.
So I'm Amy, and I'm followed in Morris footsteps. I'm the General Manager of ATYP. I'm actually doing a whole lot of research on this exact topic at the moment, so I have a lot of opinions. I think the branding issue is, to your point, is about sector rather than organisation, and the issue is that we can't even decide as a sector what our value is, firstly, and what we are as a sector. You know, I think what we tend we slip into navel gazing, in that we kind of forget that from an audience perspective, the Book of Mormon is the same as going to something, a small, you know, a creative dance piece that Chunky Move has made. The experience for the audience is different. Is the same. The reason to purchase is different, perhaps because of their interests. I think that as a sector or an industry or whatever you want to call us, they don't differentiate between a small to medium company and a major performing arts company. They just care if Jeffrey Rush is on the stage or if it's their kid. You know, like it's kind of their reason to purchase is different. I think that's where the key piece of rebranding work actually needs to happen, would be my opinion. You know, I think the greying issue is a massive one. The baby boomers are a third of the purchasing audience right now, but in 5 years' time they're going to be 1 in 5, and it's Gen X that comes next, and Gen X is half the size of the baby boomer population. And you need to put X and Y together to match just the matrix of people for the baby boomer generation. And again, to your point, I think it's really key about where the future audiences are. You know, I hear majors talk about there's only so many subscribers in Sydney, and it makes me want to tear my hair out because I kind of want to call bull on that there's a whole lot of future audiences that I think in Australia, our arts and cultural audience outreach is so far behind. You know, you look at something like, you look at the UK and what they're doing, they don't have year-long subscriptions, theatre companies, they have priority on sale, and that's about access to experience, and it's theatre as the experience and the live art that sets us apart from Netflix. And that's the point of difference, I think, that is really important in that point. And, you know, to your point about the democratisation of spaces, I think we really need allies in government for that as well. There was a really great piece, I don't know if you saw it, in Daily Review, in a response to the Creative Victoria's opinion on Opera Australia, and about the subsidising of arts to make it more affordable. You look at the National Theatre, their audiences of Great Britain, the National Theatre of Great Britain was struggling for audiences. They set up a partnership with Travelex that allowed them to sell select amount of seats for £20 a ticket, and all of a sudden their theatres were filled with a broad, diverse audience seeing shows that reflected the population of their company. Now, to your point, Australia doesn't have the sponsorship and the sponsorship and philanthropic culture that America and the UK has. We're a bit more follow the leader, and I think we need government allies to really make that democratisation happen. Whether they give us the money or not, but they need to be able to communicate the value in that, and to do that, we need to be able to communicate that. And it's kind of this.
It's all interconnected.
It's a snake that eats itself. You know, there's no one silver bullet. There's a suite of tools, I think, that needs to be delivered. So some of my many opinions.
Thank you. Here. Hi there. Oh, go on. Did someone
I
want
was
to
just going to say, just this idea about the greying population. I don't disagree, but
just because you're grey.
But we were circulating some information just prior to this panel, and one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating was that the largest proportion of people who give to the arts, this is so counterintuitive, I had to just reread it 3 times, are males, 15 to 24-year-old males. Not the quantum of the
the amount.
but not the quantum of the gift or whatever, but more young males contribute to the arts sector than any other.
In what way?
Amazing. Financially.
Yeah, financially,
whether
but
that
for
is-
what?
whether-
How to spending it on what?
No, I'm not talking about ticket buying. I'm talking about contributing, donating to the arts.
Good God.
I know. Young males, 15 to 24-year-old males.
Okay.
Kooky.
Okay. Hi there.
I know.
So, sort of going back to what you were saying about the Boston Symphony, collecting all of this data and analyzing all this data, and you were saying earlier about, the Opera House spending like $100,000 to find out that, oh no, it's cool, everyone knows who we are. I trust data, I love data. My partner does data evaluation here, so I'm pro-data, but not anti-data. But I'm also very aware of things like Orchestra X, which was done by the California Symphony, where for the cost of, say, 20 comp tickets, they invited a bunch of people in their, I think, mid-20s to early 30s to come see a show, people who had never been to one of their shows before, took them out to dinner at a craft brewery, because that's what millennials like, and just talked to them. And I think it's really important to remember that we don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I have never yet met a millennial who likes being told what millennials like, which I am aware of the irony of that statement that I just told you what millennials like. I know. But I feel like there's so much conversation about demographics as overarching groups rather than just taking those people and talking to them, because the things that they got out of that focus group were so incredibly insightful and informative. Like, the language on your website is confusing to me because you have insiders writing for insiders, and it's really not accessible. And something so simple as language, or, I wasn't sure how to dress, because we think of, an orchestra concert as, I gotta get out my fancy cocktail dress, get him in his tux, which if you've never been to an opera before or an orchestra concert before is reasonable. And
Certainly the Boston crowd they had this one, what some of the things were, dress as you come. Come in whatever you like. I think there was a Friday night show, they'd call it, dress as you come. And then it was also not just see the show, but there's a mix, you mix afterwards. I think there's a couple of drinks provided afterwards. So that, in that sense, mining them for information and just allowing them to mix, they get value add, not just the show, but the chance to actually chat and meet people afterwards.
and especially if you do have a group of young supporters, which I am a huge fan of organizations that specifically cultivate young donors as committees, and say, okay, you guys plan an event, and we'll give you what you need, but you guys plan it, and tell us what kind of party you would want to come to before the show, after the show, meet the artist. What do you want? And I think we don't spend enough time just asking people what they want. Instead, we try to figure it out without talking to them.
Okay. Can I just say something on that? So I'm an enormous believer in an area called service design, and the basic foundation of service design is understand the, anthropological behaviour of people. So as they go through experiencing something, what their pain points are, why they might buy a ticket, why they might not, why they might attend a show, why they might not. And actually for the arts, some great work we did at QPAC was like literally mapping the entire audience experience to understand at what point are you losing people. And it's a really interesting exercise I'd encourage anyone to do, because it's, you can pretty much do it for free. It's sitting down and literally talking to people in their context to understand why or why not they're actually engaging with, you and your organisation. And it's, there is nothing more valuable in life than talking to your audiences. And I do think that it's just not done enough. And any sort of opportunities that you can do that, whether it's, drinks after your shows, but, whether it's talking to people, who haven't even been to your shows, I think it's incredibly beneficial to understand what their barriers or their, pain points in sort of design language are, because it just opens up a whole new way of talking to audiences for you. And it might be the language on your website, or it might be, they don't even know where your website is because they're living in social media. So it's just understanding where they are and where they're looking for things. Yeah.
Very true. There's two other people, but can I go to you first? Yep.
Thank you. I'm Jackie, and I'm also a fan of data, as a preface. I work a lot with data, but one of the things, we do a lot of evaluations of arts programs, and something that always comes up is that whenever people start talking about money, they're actually talking about relationships, I reckon. That comes up over and over again. It's probably like if anyone's ever been through a divorce, the same thing kind of happens. Maybe a bad analogy, but anyway, but when you're talking with arts companies, dealing with issues of ticket price or, who did what in that context, as soon as they start talking about money, what they actually mean is there's a problem with this relationship, whether it be between them and their audience or them and the artist or whatever it might be. And I feel like, a lot of my bread and butter work is this context of creative industries and value add and all of that sort of stuff, but sometimes there's a problem when you're talking about branding and value add and all that sort of language that we use when we talk about the arts industry. And sometimes you need space for talking about relationships and reciprocity and respect and the people who are actually involved, and sort of reclaiming that for the arts, rather than, I know you have to have those other conversations about what's the value in this and what's my consumer want, what's my audience want, but you also have to remember that the whole thing, if you're going to rebrand the arts, would be to not brand the arts, but to talk about it as outside of commodification and outside of the consumer experience and as a relationship between people. So that's my 2 cents.
Hi, I'm Barbara. I like throwing things together from different perspectives, and I'm always wondering what can the arts learn from sport, because sport seems to do it so well, and I think it really starts with the lived experience from very young. And I've also worked in environmental education, and years ago there was a real issue with how do we get people to care about the environment. And it was all, at the beginning, quite formal, can you name things in botanical terms? I don't know if you understand water processes, soil processes. And then there was a really amazing study that National Parks did, where they looked at how kids in their own backyard were recognising their environment in their backyard. They might not have called it the same things, but they were actually caring about the environment. And they adopted this program which was about recognising the value of that and recognising that as being an act of being aware and caring for your environment and being environmentally conscious. And that program has gone on and become sort of manifest in the whole education system. It's changed the sort of way that you focus on what it was to be an advocate for the environment. So it started with a lived experience that was in your own backyard. And to me, that seems to be one of the things that really needs to happen in the arts, is to build and acknowledge the experiences that happen day to day. From the moment we're born, because we all do it, as parents, we artify our children's existence through gesture, through expression, through marking, and it goes on. And then it sort of becomes named as other things. And by the time you end up in school, you either are or you aren't, or you feel like you are or you aren't. So I feel like it needs to start right there, and it needs to be experience-based, policy-based, but it's a language, partly a language thing, but it's about building recognition. I really believe that most people love making art in some way, shape or form. And if we can kind of marry that a little bit with the experiences of what it is to play sport, because, you know, if you're running down the field, there's the exhilaration of moving. That's very similar to the exhilaration of dance. There's costume, there's theatre, there's all kinds of things there. So can we bring some of that together as a kind of artification of the experience of being human? And then that's something that kind of can be married again with an online experience and an offline experience. But to me, the crisis in the arts is about living the experience and recognising the links between the online and the offline. We can't all live it online because we'll lose our embodied experience.
Yeah, we are herd animals, aren't we? Yeah, yeah. Look, I think that's it. I think Stuart's up the back there waiting for the bar to open.
Ask a question quickly to the audience. Who in the last 3 months has been to a live performing arts event? Who in the last 3 months has been to a live sporting event? Okay, I think that makes us a minority. So are we at risk of marketing to ourselves? I think it was you, Lisa, who taught me the biggest mistake you can make is marketing to yourself.
Yeah, well, it's thinking you are the audience. Yeah.
Is there a risk that we've done that as an industry? I love it.
Yeah, personally, I think, and this is kind of what I was trying to get to in the earlier thing, you need to talk to people. So I completely agree. If you're making assumptions based on your own personal experience, you are not, you know, indicative of the broader population. In fact, the very fact that you've turned up tonight to an arts event says you're probably not indicative of, you know, the broader population that you're trying to attract. So you need to talk to those people, and you need to understand their barriers and not assume that they are like you, because chances are they're not, and they have very different experiences and challenges. So yeah, you know, I often get frustrated at work when people say, oh well, but I did this, and it's like, yeah, but you are not the population, so, you know, let's go out and let's talk to people who are more indicative of your average audience. The fact that you work in a particular industry normally says you're not very indicative of a broader population. So go out and talk to those people and understand their barriers.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out on this damp night. Thank you to our wonderful panel for their thoughtful contributions to this somewhat nebulous kind of topic that we all tried to get our heads around. I hope we've contributed and made some sense. Thank you very much, and let's give a round of applause to our wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Vivian.
You're very welcome.
For your facilitation and stepping in last time. Please, everybody, stay around. We used to have to be out of here at 8 o'clock. We now have a sort of small extension, so please stay around, have a chat, meet somebody, and have a glass of wine and some cheese with us. Thank you.